Good morning, everyone. So, let's start with our today's topic, that's rheumatoid arthritis from Robin's textbook, right? So, let's proceed. First of all, what is rheumatoid arthritis? Rheumatoid arthritis is a chronic autoimmune disorder that principally attacks the joint, producing a non suppurative, proliferative, and inflammatory synovitis. Rheumatoid arthritis often progresses to articular cartilage destruction and in some cases the joint fusion, that's ankylosis, right? तो अब तक अपने को क्या समझ में आया कि rheumatoid arthritis एक acute है कि chronic है, so it's a chronic condition. Secondly, it's autoimmune disorder. It's very important point to remember. It's an autoimmune disorder that primarily affects the joints because the word arthro is for joints, and it is an inflammatory disorder which is characterized by non-suppurative, proliferative, and inflammatory synovitis. So there are certain inflammatory changes which occurs in the joint. So this is a autoimmune disorder which is chronic, right? So chronic autoimmune disorder which mainly affects the joint, resulting in certain inflammatory changes within the joint. That is, we have the joint cavity, uh, which is uh, which is composed of certain cells which are inflamed, synovitis. Now, what happens? Rheumatoid arthritis often progresses to articular cartilage destruction and the joint fusion, that is ankylosis. Now, what happens over the time? These inflammatory changes, as we know that we have the two bones, and the two bones are being linked to each other by these two bones. We have a joint present between the two bones, and this entire joint is covered by a joint capsule, and this joint capsule is covered is enclosed by a synovial cavity or a synovial lining, the synovial cells which secretes the synovial fluid, and therefore joint space is completely filled with the synovial fluid. Now what happens due to rheumatoid arthritis condition? It results in the destruction of the articular cartilage which is lining the bone, and those cells which are producing the synovium, such that the two bones comes in a very close proximity to each other, and this inflammatory changes eventually results in a process which is known as ankylosis, that is the joint fusion. Since it's a autoimmune disorder, so it won't be affecting, or it won't be limited to a certain joint. It would even have certain extra articular manifestations as well, which may even involve the skin, we have the heart, the blood vessels, the lungs, and it may even lead to certain clinical manifestations that overlap with other autoimmune disorders. So it can even be linked to certain other autoimmune disorders like SLE, that systemic lupus erythematosus, and the scleroderma. As far as prevalence of rheumatoid arthritis being concerned, it's approximately 1%. And the incidence peaks in second to fourth decade, right? So the thing you need to know that it occurs in uh, second to fourth decades, right? 20 to 40 years of age, and it is three times more common in women than in men. So we have 2 to 3 points which we can sum up, right? So first of all, we need to know that we have the rheumatoid arthritis as a disease. It's acute or chronic, so it's a chronic disease. It's autoimmune, right? And you need to know that it's more common in women as compared to male, and its ratio is almost 3:1, and it's more common in age 20 to 40 years of age. Furthermore, you need to also know that this rheumatoid arthritis is a condition which is mainly characterized by certain inflammatory changes. What does arthritis means? The arthritis is simply the inflammation, right? So inflammation affecting the joint, basically the synovitis, and it is mainly characterized by two main things. It is mainly characterized by the two main things. Listen, here we have a joint. Here we have, let us suppose these are the two bones, right? These two bones are covered by something which is known as joint capsule, and on the inner aspect of the joint capsule we have certain cells, right? Here we have the articular cartilage between the two bones, and inside to the cells here we have certain cells which secrete the synovial fluid, right, which lines our joint cavity, and which is present to prevent the friction between these two bones, right? And which is a very essential component and contributes to the mobility of the joint, right? What happens in rheumatoid arthritis is that this articular cartilage, these are the bones, right? These two articular cartilages undergo the destruction. Also, we have chronic inflammatory changes. We will discuss later upon uh, in this video that we have something which is known as pannus formation which takes place, and this pannus is very important because it is the inflammatory changes which occurs in joint, and specifically in the condition of rheumatoid arthritis, right? Now what happens, due to the chronic inflammatory changes, the synovial fluid, the two bones comes in very close proximity to each other because the synovial fluid is no longer present due to such chronic inflammation. These two bones comes too closer to each other, it almost results in a bone fusion. This bone fusion, and this bone fusion is well known as ankylosis. This is known as ankylosis. So remember, we have two main things or three main things where the rheumatoid arthritis is mainly characterized by two, means chiefly the two things: articular cartilage destruction, and we have secondly the ankylosis. Ankylosis, that is the fusion of bone, right? So this we have discussed as far. Now let's proceed to the pathogenesis. So the autoimmune responses in the rheumatoid arthritis is initiated by CD4 plus helper T cells. So who is the initiator for the autoimmune responses? It's the CD4 helper T cells. As in the other autoimmune diseases, the genetic predisposition and the environmental factors also contribute to the development of disease, the progression of disease, and the persistence of disease. Certain pathological changes in the rheumatoid arthritis are mediated by antibodies against the self antigens and the inflammation which is induced by cytokine, predominantly those secreted by CD4 helper T cells, right? The activated CD4 plus T cells releases certain inflammatory mediators that stimulate the other inflammatory cells, leading to the tissue injury. Although many of the cytokines mediators can be isolated from the inflamed joint, and the most important one include interferon. Uh, the most importantly includes interferon gamma from the helper T1 cells, which activates the macrophages, and the resident synovial cells, the interleukin 17 from helper T17 cells, which recruit the neutrophils and monocyte, the rank ligand, which is expressed on activated T cells and stimulates the bone resorption, and lastly, we have the TNF and interleukin from the macrophages, which stimulates the resting synovial cells to secrete certain proteases that destroys the hyaline cartilages. So basically what we have is that rheumatoid arthritis is an inflammatory condition, or autoimmune condition, and the main initiated by helper T cells, and we have certain autoantibodies which are present in this condition of rheumatoid arthritis, and these autoantibodies uh, not only target the joint spaces, they also target certain other cells of our body which consist of means the self antigens, since it's an autoimmune response, right? And various cells are involved here, and various other cytokines are released from these helper T cells, CD4 plus helper T cells, which plays an important role in the pathogenesis of the rheumatoid arthritis. Now let us progress to next page. As we already know, ki uh, have a look here, right? So here we have the entire responses, right? First of all, we know that for any autoimmune response to get initiated, we have two main factors, that is the genetic susceptibility and the environmental factor. As far as genetic susceptibility being concerned, we have certain um, human leukocyte antigen related alleles which plays an important role, right? Like in if I say ki in rheumatoid arthritis we have HLA-DR4. Environmental factors, we know that we have something which is well known as infection or a smoking, and what these factors lead to, the genetic susceptibility we have already learned will result in the failure of self tolerance mechanism and the unregulated lymphocytic activation. Secondly, the environmental factors will contribute to enzymatic modification, like citrullinization of the it's citrullination of the sulfur protein. Now, both these factors, the genetic susceptibility, the environmental factors, ultimately contribute to B and T responses to the self antigens, right? We have certain T cells like helper T17 cells, the helper T1 cells, and we have the B cell that is further differentiated in plasma cells and start secreting certain antibodies. Now we have this T cells, lymphocytes, that is B and